A mountain man saved a mail-order bride, and her younger sister refused to leave his cabin. The snow was falling in thin, fast needles when the mountain man spotted the wagon tracks swerving across the narrow road. And before he even reached the bend, he heard the frantic neigh of a horse, the crack of a broken wheel, and a woman's thin cry swallowed by the wind. He pushed his stride harder, boots punching through the drifts, until the overturned wagon came into view with one lantern still burning, swinging crooked from a half-torn rope. And beside it lay a young woman in a pale blue dress. Mud splashed up her sleeves, a bruise forming along her cheekbone, and her hands trembling around a mail-order letter she refused to let go of even in the cold. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her like a shield as he checked her breathing. And she gasped when his fingertips brushed her wrist, eyes fluttering open to meet his, confused, dazed, but still fighting. Don't leave me here," she whispered, her voice soft enough that he leaned closer to hear her over the wind. "I'm not leaving you," he answered, lifting her carefully from the frozen ground as the letter slipped from her hand, fluttering against his coat. The horse kicked weakly nearby, its reins tangled in the broken wheel, and just as he turned to free it, he heard another sound, a small, frightened sob. He looked toward the wagon door and saw her younger sister crouched inside, barely 18, clutching her arms around herself like she expected someone to drag her out. "Come on," he said gently, reaching up toward her. But she shook her head violently and pressed herself deeper into the corner until the bride, shivering in his arms, whispered, "Please. She won't move unless you take us both." The girl finally crawled out, eyes wide and fixed on him as though trying to decide whether he was danger or salvation. And when he offered his free hand, she grabbed it with surprising strength, refusing to let go even when they reached the path. "My cabin's close," he told them, shifting the bride's weight in his arms, feeling her head fall against his shoulder in exhaustion. The younger sister walked right beside him, nearly tripping with every step but never loosening her grip on his coat sleeve. And for a moment, he wondered what kind of terror would make a girl cling to a stranger, like he was her last safe place left on earth. The storm thickened, swallowing the road behind them until the world felt narrowed to 3 breaths and 1 lantern of failing light. And as they reached the edge of the trees, he sensed it. That unspoken truth humming between the sisters that tonight's rescue was only the beginning of something far more complicated. By the time they reached his cabin, the storm had turned savage, the kind that erased footprints faster than a man could make them. And he had to lean into the wind to push the door open with his shoulder while still holding the bride against his chest. The warmth inside hit them like a shock, the fire he'd banked earlier still glowing red in the hearth. And as he lowered her gently onto the bearskin rug, she let out a breath that sounded more like surrender than relief. The younger sister stepped in behind him, dripping snow from her hair, looking around the one-room cabin, as if memorizing every arc of the shadows, every piece of wood, every distance between herself and the man who had carried them through a night that could have easily swallowed them whole. She hovered near the doorway at first, arms wrapped tight around her ribs, until the bride whispered her name. "Clara, come closer, please." And only then did the girl move, her feet hesitant but her eyes never leaving the mountain man, watching every motion as he unbuckled his coat, hung it by the fire, and knelt beside the bride to check her pulse one more time. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his thumb brushing dirt from her cheek. But as soon as he stood to reach for a blanket, the younger sister darted forward faster than he expected, snatching the wool from his hands before he could unfold it and wrapping it herself around the bride, as if proving she didn't trust him to do it right. He didn't call her out for it. There was something in her stare, something raw, a blend of fear and fierce protectiveness that didn't match her age. And when he turned to prepare water on the stove, he could feel her gaze burning between his shoulder blades, like she was waiting for him to show a fault, a threat, anything. Once the water warmed, he handed a tin cup to the bride, who sipped slowly, whispering, "Thank you for stopping." And though he only nodded, her sister stepped forward again, placing herself between them as if shielding her from gratitude itself. "We can leave in the morning," he said, wiping snow from his beard with a rough hand. But the younger one stiffened instantly, eyes narrowing, and the bride's expression faltered too. Not because she wanted to stay, he could tell, but because something outside this cabin, something they'd fled, was waiting for them in the daylight. "We'll talk then," he added, sensing the unspoken tension stretch tight across the room like a wire. But when he turned toward the window to check the storm, the younger sister moved silently behind him and slid the cabin latch down, locking them in. Not out of fear of him, he realized, but out of fear of whatever she believed might still be out there searching for them. And that was the moment he understood. She wasn't just scared. She wasn't planning to leave at all. The storm hammered against the cabin walls through the long hours before dawn. And though the mountain man had offered both sisters a chance to rest on his bed while he took the chair, the bride insisted she only needed an hour. "Just 1 hour, I promise." Her voice weak but steady as she tried to sit upright, despite the way her body kept swaying like the cold was still wrapped around her bones. He didn't argue. He merely adjusted the pillow behind her back and moved the chair closer so he could keep watch without crowding her. But the younger sister bristled at every movement he made, positioning herself on the edge of the bed beside the bride, as if any distance between them was a danger she couldn't allow. The cabin grew warm enough that frost slid down the window in soft streaks. And for a few minutes, there was quiet. The kind of fragile calm that comes only after fear has burned itself hollow, until the bride exhaled shakily and murmured, "He'll come looking." And the younger sister snapped her head toward her, her fingers tightening around her wrist with a silent warning that told him the fear wasn't from nature or wolves or the road. It was a man, someone with a claim over them, someone they'd run from. He didn't push. He'd learned long ago that wounded people reveal truth the way thawing ice breaks. Not all at once, but with thin cracks of sound that warn of something deeper beneath. 1 hour, the bride repeated, eyes fluttering shut. But even before the words faded, her body sagged towards sleep, exhaustion dragging her under. He leaned forward, ready to catch her head before it slumped. But the younger sister reacted faster, pulling her into her lap and glaring at him like he'd done something wrong simply by anticipating the fall. He sat back, raising his hands in quiet surrender, but her stare didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened, the kind of look that said she didn't intend to trust him, not tonight, maybe not ever. He watched her for a while as she kept vigil over her sister, her own exhaustion obvious in the droop of her shoulders. Yet she never loosened her hold or let herself blink longer than a heartbeat. And he wondered, not for the first time, what kind of journey had carved that much fear into someone so young. An hour passed. The bride slept on. Another half hour, and still she didn't stir. He rose once to check the stove, once to toss a log into the fire. And each time the younger sister followed his movements with the alertness of a feral creature who'd been cornered too many times. When the bride finally whimpered in her sleep and shifted against her, the younger sister whispered, "We're not leaving. Not in the morning. Not yet." And though the storm roared like the world outside was cracking open, he knew the real conflict had just begun. Because she wasn't asking permission. She was declaring it. The storm had eased by mid-morning, leaving the world outside white and muted. But inside the cabin, the air felt tighter than it had during the night, thick with the kind of silence that forms when three people are trying not to reveal what they're really thinking. The mountain man moved quietly around the stove, ladling porridge into tin bowls. Yet he could feel the younger sister's stare trailing him like a shadow that refused to detach, her eyes following every motion of his hands, as if memorizing them for reasons she hadn't decided whether to trust or fear. When he set a bowl near the bride, who was still waking slowly from the deepest sleep exhaustion could force, the younger sister slid herself between them without a word, blocking his reach and lifting the spoon herself to test the heat before offering it to her sister. Her posture rigid, protective, territorial in a way that made the room feel noticeably smaller. He didn't comment. He merely stepped back, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. But when the bride finally lifted her gaze and gave him a tired, grateful smile, the younger one cut her off with a sharp whisper. "Don't exhaust yourself." The bride gave her a soft look, the kind that spoke of years of swapping roles, sometimes sister, sometimes mother, sometimes the one who needed holding. But something in the exchange told him the younger sister had been carrying far more than her share lately, maybe long before the wagon overturned. "You should both eat," he said gently, keeping his voice low so it didn't feel like an order. But the younger sister's expression flickered, like she was weighing whether the softness was real or just another kind of danger dressed politely. She tasted the porridge first, then handed a spoonful to the bride, never breaking eye contact with him, as though daring him to challenge her claim over the woman she guarded. When he finally sat across from them at the table, the younger sister stiffened again, shifting her body to block the bride from his direct view. And he realized she wasn't simply being wary. She felt something she didn't know how to name yet. Something pulled from the mix of fear, gratitude, and the strange safety of waking up in a cabin where a man had carried them through a night they wouldn't have survived alone. "You can relax, Clara," the bride murmured, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "He saved us." But Clara's reply was immediate, defensive, almost too quick. "He saved you." She said it like the distinction mattered, like she was still selecting her place in this story and wasn't ready to give an inch of space to him. Not until she understood why her heart had started pounding the moment he walked across the room. The mountain man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. She was watching him too closely because she didn't know yet whether she feared him or needed him. The bride was finally strong enough to sit by the fire on her own, her color returning in soft shades as the heat reached her chilled bones. And while she rested with her hands folded neatly in her lap, the younger sister paced the length of the cabin, like a restless animal circling territories she wasn't willing to surrender. Her eyes flicking between the mountain man and the door, as if guarding both, the exit that terrified her and the man she wasn't sure she could trust. He kept his distance, letting them adjust without pressure. But when he crouched beside the stove to add another log, the bride whispered a quiet, "Thank you." The kind meant only for him, and Clara spun so fast it seemed the word itself had struck her. "You don't have to thank him," Clara muttered, stepping between them with a force that didn't match her size, her shoulder pressing back against the bride as she faced him with narrowed eyes. And he realized then that gratitude wasn't the emotion Clara feared. It was its consequences. The bride touched her sister's arm gently, murmuring, "He carried me through a blizzard, Clara." But Clara shook her off, her voice trembling with something sharper than fear. "And what will he want for that? What will anyone want?" she demanded. And for the first time, he heard the exhaustion cracking through her edge. The weight of too many dangers survived, and too many men who expected payment for mercy. "Nothing," he said quietly, straightening to meet Clara's stare head-on. But the firmness in his tone only made her step closer, as though needing proof she couldn't yet trust. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the fire sputtering in a way that cast their shadows long and tangled across the walls. And when the bride reached for Clara's hand, trying to pull her back into calm, Clara snapped, "You're too quick to trust," her voice cracking at the end in a way that made the bride freeze, because beneath it lay something raw, something protective enough to turn into possession without her noticing. "He saved you, not us," Clara continued, though she stood closer to the fire than the bride did now. Closer to the warmth, closer to the safety she claimed not to owe him. "And I'm not leaving this cabin until I know you won't get hurt again." The bride tried to speak, but Clara cut her off with a sudden, trembling confession. "And if staying means staying with him, then that's what we're doing." The words landed with a weight none of them expected. Heavy enough that even the fire seemed to pause before cracking again, and the mountain man understood with a quiet, sinking clarity that gratitude had not only shifted, it had hardened into something deeper, something fierce, something dangerously close to belonging. And Clara wasn't ready to let anyone challenge it. The argument began the moment the bride tried to stand, insisting she needed to stretch her legs, and the mountain man instinctively moved toward her to steady the shift of her weight. But Clara intercepted him like a flash of wildfire, pressing her palm against her sister's shoulder and snapping, "She doesn't need your help," with a fierceness that surprised even her. The bride's breath hitched, caught between gratitude and embarrassment, and the mountain man paused mid-step, reading the tension as clearly as the glow from the fire that filled the cabin with restless gold. "Clara," the bride murmured, "please don't start." But Clara wasn't listening. Her jaw was tight, her voice brittle from sleeplessness and the desperate belief that the world was always one wrong man away from shattering again. "You act like none of this happened before," Clara hissed, her words aimed at her sister, but her glare locked on him. "Like trusting the wrong person didn't already destroy your whole life once." He inhaled slowly, steady, letting her spill the truth she'd been holding back since the road, since the overturned wagon, since she'd chosen fear over breath. He'd seen people come off the edge of danger enough times to know that the calm after rescue is the moment old wounds will tear open. "I'm not him," he said simply. No anger, no push, just the kind of grounded certainty that makes the ground feel steadier underfoot. But Clara reacted as if the air had snapped. She stepped forward, so close now that the fire behind her painted a trembling outline along her hair. "That's what they all say," she whispered, the tremor in her voice betraying a truth she hadn't wanted to confess. That she wasn't arguing because she distrusted him. She was arguing because she distrusted her own instinct to feel safe around him. The bride finally stood, fingers curling gently but firmly around Clara's wrist. "He didn't hurt me," she said softly. "He saved me. He saved both of us." Clara shook her head, but didn't pull away, and for the first time that morning, tears gathered along her lower lashes, not falling, just pooling, sharp and stubborn like she refused to let any of them escape. "I can't lose you," she whispered, the words so small they barely carried over the fire's crackle. "Not again. Not because you trusted someone too easily." The mountain man's throat tightened, unexpected and unwelcome, as he watched the depth of their bond unfold like a wound finally exposed to light. "You're not losing her," he said quietly, stepping back to give them space, even though the distance hurt more than he admitted. But Clara's eyes followed him anyway, wide, conflicted, and burning with the realization she couldn't deny any longer. The danger wasn't him. The danger was how safe she already felt in his cabin. The storm finally broke by afternoon, leaving a pale, sharp quiet over the mountains. But inside the cabin, the tension still hung heavy as smoke, the kind that doesn't clear just because the weather does. The mountain man stepped outside only long enough to split a few logs, needing the rhythm of the axe to steady his own thoughts. And when he returned, carrying an armful of wood, he found Clara standing in the doorway, like she was guarding the threshold itself. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted in a way that made her look braver than she felt. She didn't move aside until he stopped a full step back, refusing to force the space between them. And only then did she slowly shift just enough for him to enter, though her eyes stayed glued to him with the same mix of suspicion and something too raw to be named. He set the logs down beside the hearth, dusting snow from his hands, and spoke before she could. His tone low even, steady enough to catch both sisters' attention. "I'm going to say this once," he began, turning not toward the fire, but toward the dirt path outside, visible through the open door behind her. "You can stay here tonight. You can rest, eat, breathe. But come morning, I'll take you wherever you need to go. That's where my line is." Clara flinched like the words were a swing of the axe instead of a boundary. And the bride, still sitting wrapped in a blanket, looked between them with quiet worry. "We can't leave yet," the bride whispered. But Clara stepped in front of her immediately, answering for them both with a sharp, "We're not going anywhere." He met her gaze without rising to the heat in it. "You think locking yourselves in my cabin is safety," he said. "But fear doesn't choose right. It just chooses the closest place to hide." Clara's mouth parted, a retort ready. But the truth in his voice cut through her defensiveness like a blade through cloth. For the first time since he'd found them, she looked unsure of where to put her hands, her weight shifting from foot to foot as though she wanted to challenge him, but didn't know what she'd earn if she did. "You don't get to decide for us," she finally said. But her voice was softer now, the anger thinned by something bruised and vulnerable underneath. He walked past her, careful not to brush her shoulder, and stepped into the yard to sweep a clean line through the fresh snow with the side of his boot, a long, straight mark drawn with intention. When he turned back, both sisters stood in the doorway watching him. Clara's eyes locked on the line as if it spoke a truth she hadn't wanted to hear. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you choose which side of that line you stand on. But it has to be your choice, not fear's." And though Clara didn't speak, the way her breath trembled told him she knew exactly what he meant, and that crossing that line might change everything she'd been clinging to since the night they'd escaped. The wind had quieted by the time evening settled over the cabin, turning the world outside into a pale blue hush. But inside, the air crackled like a storm still brewing. One made not of snow or sky, but of two sisters finally colliding with a truth they'd been circling since the night he found them. The mountain man sat at the table, carving a strip of wood, giving them space, but listening closely enough to step in if fear pushed either of them too far. The bride, her strength returning in slow, steady breaths, walked toward the line visible through the open door, staring out at the long mark he had drawn in the snow. Her fingers tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders, not out of cold, but because she knew exactly what that line meant. "We can't stay," she said softly, the words trembling with honesty instead of fear. Clara froze behind her, the shock in her voice sharp enough to slice the room. "You want to leave?" she whispered, disbelief cracking the last of her control. "After everything? After what he said?" The bride faced her fully then, something steadier burning behind her eyes. "He didn't threaten us, Clara. He set a choice. Because he doesn't want to be another man we're afraid of." Clara's breath hitched, but she shook her head violently, stepping toward her sister as if she could physically pull her back from the thought. "We're not going out there," she snapped, pointing toward the shadowed woods. "He'll find us. You know he will." The bride's shoulders sagged, exhaustion bleeding through her resolve. "We can't live in a stranger's cabin forever." "He's not a stranger." Clara's voice cracked hard, and the mountain man finally lifted his head at the force of it, his knife stilling mid-carve. Silence pulsed between the three of them, heavy, waiting, until Clara swallowed and pressed a shaking hand to her chest. "I feel safer here than I've felt in years," she admitted, each word sounding like it was dragged from her ribs. "And you want to walk away from that?" The bride blinked back a wave of emotion, stepping closer to her sister. "I want to make a choice out of hope," she whispered. "Not out of fear." Clara's jaw trembled, her gaze flicking toward the mountain man, accusing, longing, terrified, all tangled behind her eyes. Then back to her sister, who held her hand out gently, offering a piece Clara wasn't ready to take. "I stayed alive for you," Clara breathed. "You don't get to leave me behind." The bride squeezed her hand, firm but tender. "I'm not leaving you. I'm asking you to walk with me." And for the first time, Clara looked between her sister and the man whose cabin had saved them. And she realized the world wasn't splitting into two sides of a line. She was. Night settled over the cabin with a strange, breathless stillness. The kind that feels like the world holding itself quiet while something important takes shape. And the mountain man sensed the shift the moment he stepped outside to bring in the last stack of firewood. The air was crisp, the sky clearing above the treetops. And yet inside, the tension between the sisters pulsed like a wound too deep to leave unattended. When he returned, Clara stood alone by the hearth, her arms wrapped around herself, staring into the flames as if they were whispering things she didn't want to hear. The bride sat at the table, her hands folded, her face calm but resolute, as if she had made some peace with the storm inside her that Clara hadn't reached yet. He set the wood down quietly, but Clara turned, eyes bright with unfallen tears. "If we leave," she said hoarsely, "we go back to running, back to hiding, back to him." Her voice faltered, the memory clawing at her throat. "You know what he'll do if he finds us?" The bride looked at her gently, her voice steady. "I know, but we can't make every choice out of fear. Not anymore." Clara shook her head, stepping back until her shoulders hit the wall. "You're stronger than I am," she whispered. "You can face him. I can't." She blinked rapidly, tears finally spilling. And the confession broke something in him he didn't expect. The rawness of a girl who had fought too long, too hard, without ever having the strength to admit she was tired. He approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. And for once, Clara didn't flinch. She just looked at him like she was waiting for judgment. "I won't let him near either of you," he said quietly. And though his tone held no bravado, no threat, the steadiness of it settled into the room like a promise that anchored the air. Clara's breath shuddered. "You don't owe us that." He held her gaze. "Doesn't matter what I owe. It's what I choose." The bride stood then, walking toward them with slow, measured steps, her hand finding Clara's trembling fingers. We don't need to decide tonight, she said softly. Not while we're angry. Not while our heads are clouded. Clara leaned into her sister's shoulder, just barely, but enough for him to see the truth. She wasn't refusing to leave because she loved the cabin. She was refusing because she loved her sister too fiercely to risk losing the one safe person she had left. He stepped back toward the door, giving them space. And when he glanced at the line in the snow outside, half faded, half shining under the moon, he realized something he hadn't seen before. The choice tomorrow wasn't just theirs. It was his too. Morning came quietly, not with sunlight pouring through the cabin windows, but with a soft gray glow that softened every edge of the room, as if the world itself had paused to let them breathe before asking anything more of them. The mountain man rose first, stepping outside to check the trail, and found the line he'd drawn nearly vanished beneath the night's new snow. A faint mark rather than a boundary. And something about that felt right. Choices shouldn't be cages. When he returned, the sisters were awake, sitting side by side on the bed, Clara clutching her sister's hand while the bride watched him with a steadiness she hadn't possessed 2 days ago. "We talked," the bride said simply, her fingers brushing Clara's knuckles in a silent promise. Clara swallowed, her gaze flicking between her sister and the door where the world waited like a wolf that had learned their names. "We'll go with you," Clara whispered, barely louder than breath. "Not because we're not scared, but because we're tired of fear choosing for us." Her voice trembled with the weight of a girl who had been brave for too long. The mountain man nodded once, not triumphant, not relieved, just present, grounding the moment like a man who knew that safety wasn't a place, but a choice you made with the right people beside you. "We'll travel slow," he said. "And if trouble comes, it faces me first." Clara didn't look away this time. Instead, for the first time, her shoulders lowered as if she finally believed someone might carry part of her burden. The bride reached up, touching Clara's cheek with the gentleness of an older sister who had carried guilt longer than anyone noticed, and whispered, "We walk together, always." Clara's eyes shimmered, but didn't fall, her voice steadier now. Together. The three of them stepped outside then, the cold brushing their faces, the trees rising tall and quiet around the clearing, and the cabin behind them standing like a witness to the hardest truths they had spoken. Clara paused at the faded line in the snow, staring at it as though she expected it to decide something for her. But when the mountain man extended his hand, not demanding, not leading, just offering, she took it without hesitation, the touch light and new and honest. The bride stepped to his other side, placing her hand gently on his arm, and for a moment they stood like that. Three people shaped by fear, but refusing to be ruled by it. As they walked down the trail, the cabin grew smaller behind them, but the warmth it had given them didn't fade. It followed, tucked inside every breath they took. And somewhere in that quiet morning light, the storm they'd survived finally eased. For the first time in a long time, they were moving toward something instead of running from it. This was another Crimson West story. If it touched you, like, share, and subscribe. And for more long stories, the channel is waiting for you.